Thank you for joining us for the Virginia Beach Public Library's Meet the Authors series. Today we welcome back Paa-Kofi Obeng.
Thank you so much.
Paa-Kofi was interviewed last year as part of a group of local authors and discussed his first book, Vigil. We are happy to have him return to discuss his second book in the series, Sovereign. For those who didn't see your interview last year, Paa-Kofi, remind us a little bit about your background.
Thank you so much again for having me, Chris. Welcome everybody who's watching this video. My name is Paa-Kofi Obeng. I was formerly trained as a physician and I moved to the Hampton Roads area in 2013. When I came up with the idea for Vigil, my first book in the series, that actually was something I thought of in middle school. And as a matter of fact, I didn't really formalize it until about 2014 when I actually sat down, put everything together, and then actually put it into a novel. And then thankfully it was released in 2019. So yeah, and then after that, of course, as we'll talk about today, I released my second book, December 2021, which is a sequel to Vigil called Sovereign.
Paa-Kofi, do you have any formal training as a writer?
No, I do not. No, I do not. Outside of what you learn in middle school, high school, and college, no. Not really. Most of my training comes from, my education, growing up, and then also just my experience reading other novels, but no formal training in writing, no.
So tell us a little bit about your latest book.
Sure. So Sovereign is the sequel to Vigil. So Vigil was the initial debut novel. And Sovereign, it kind of continues that storyline. It's a techno thriller that continues the storyline from the first novel. So essentially, what's happened is the team went through a transition of becoming sort of known commodities to the world in terms of being a super team. But in this novel, they get confronted with a tech corporation, basically an organization that's literally taken over all of the telecommunications within the United States. And so that corporation is headed by a CEO who basically has other plans in mind in terms of humanity's evolution in terms of the next step. He believes in something more mechanical or more synthetic than what we have in terms of normal humanity.
Would people want to have read your first book before reading this one, do you think?
It would help slightly. But it's not necessary. I do a lot of callbacks, and people can infer things from the first book. Sorry, from the second book that they don't necessarily need to read the first book.
And are there more books planned for the series?
Yes, indeed, there are. I plan on doing a total of 7. Right now, I'm on book 2, so I look forward to doing up to 7 books. So I still have 5 more to go.
Did you find it was easier writing the second book?
Um, yes and no. I think the biggest challenge for me was that it was a little bit harder to actually put it into a novel format. Coming up with a plot was not so bad, but actually organizing it into something that was understandable, I think that was probably the biggest challenge for me. I think too, once you become more comfortable writing, then it becomes a lot easier um, come up with storylines. It's just one of those things that takes time. Stephen King wasn't perfect when he first came out with his first novel, and neither will any new writer.
Do you find you're getting a little better as you write, like maybe better, the second being better than the first, perhaps?
I think so. I think so. Excuse me. I'm sorry. I think so. I would say I feel comfortable. I think my prose has gotten better, but it's not gotten to where I want it to be quite yet. I think as I'm learning and actually I'm doing some more reading, I'm trying to get as much as I can, get a little bit better in terms of um, writing in a format that is engaging for readers and also a format that can keep their attention. So I want them to be interested in the characters, but at the same time, not fall asleep.
Yes.
Yeah.
What are some of the challenges you face in not having writing as your primary career?
Oh gosh, that's a great question, Chris. I think the biggest challenge for me is finding the time to write. I mean, being a full-time physician, having other things, other challenges, having a family makes it such a challenge. And most, I would say, majority of writers out there, usually they have another 9 to 5 job. It's not, you know, not too many of us are blessed to be like Tomi Adeyemi or other people where that's basically their area of expertise is writing. They have a hit novel and then they rocket to the top. Most of us are people who have had jobs being mechanics, teachers, lawyers, physicians, and we have a love and passion for writing. So we try and find ways to incorporate it in our day-to-day activities. And gradually, when we carve out that time, we're able to, produce something hopefully that people enjoy reading.
If you were to achieve great success with your novels, would you consider giving up your work as a physician?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know. That's a great question, Chris. I might consider it. Just don't tell my bosses, but I might consider it. Uh, um, but I still have a love for medicine, and it's definitely something that was my number one passion even before I started writing visual. I would
Yes.
consider it. I don't think I'll cut it off completely. I'll probably do maybe like part-time work or like kind of more volunteer work, but I don't think I'd give it up altogether.
Talk a little bit about self-publishing versus having a publisher.
Great question, Chris. So there are pros and cons to being self-published, which I am. So I am self-published. I did this all on my own, created my own company, publishing house to self-publish my books. And essentially, some of the benefits are that you get to take all the credit. You have all creative control. So what I mean by that is sometimes people, let's say they are signed to Random House or to Simon and Schuster. Those companies have the final say in terms of how your book cover is going to look, how the edits are going to be, how much money you make from it. You get an advance being, a traditionally published author, but then at the same time, you have to be able to make that money back. So that is a little bit of the benefit of being a self-published author is you don't have to worry about having to get co-signed by someone else in a publishing house. You can have complete control. You get all the royalties, even though, and I'll get into this in a second, you have to bear the upfront cost. You still get the overall benefit of getting the royalties, even though you publish through, let's say, Amazon, or you publish through, or you upload your book through Ingram Spark and it gets distributed to libraries and Barnes and Noble and so forth. So those are some of the pros. Now, the cons of being a self-published author kind of are a mirror image of being a of the pro. So essentially, you have to accept all the faults. So if there are errors in spelling, if there's some editing issues, of course they're going to blame you. To a certain extent, even with traditionally published authors, they still have to deal with that as well. But since you're the go-to person, it's pretty much all on you. So you have to make sure that it's as edited as best as possible. I actually had to go through that myself. And even after, it's interesting. Even after you've gone through some of the edits, you've sent it out to someone to be formally edited. Sometimes you might even find stuff on your own after they give you back that edited manuscript that you still need to change. Um, and then the other thing too is you have to bear the upfront cost. So it can be financially costly for someone to self-publish. If you want to self-publish, a very well put together book, there's challenges in terms of finding a designer. Like you need someone to design your cover. Some people are able to design it or find ready-made covers online, which is okay, but it might not necessarily fit the tone of the book that you're trying to write. So that is a costly aspect. I had to actually get a designer who did my interior. Actually, the same designer I had for my first and second book. He had to do both the interiors and he did the outlay of the cover, but I actually had to hire another artist to do the actual cover art for book two. And then you'll bear the cost of the marketing as well. It's all on you. It's the benefit of having like I said before, like a Random House or Simon Schuster or Knopf is the fact that they bear the brunt of the cost of marketing. Like they can put your stuff out on Amazon, Barnes Noble, Books a Million. They can reach out to the library system. But when you're an indie, it's kind of all on you. So you have to put in the money up front to do ads, to do outreaches to the community, to do interviews in the community, that's kind of all on you. So those are some of the challenges. And then along with that is you kind of have to create your own marketing plan. And I will say this, between both the independent and traditionally published authors, they still bear a lot of responsibility when it comes to promoting their book. But I would say the lion's share responsibility falls on the independently published author, because they have to come up with a marketing plan and come up with this an approach of how they're going to promote their book, get it out in the community, get a fan base. So that is kind of the challenge there. So
And that leads me right into my next slide.
yeah.
How do you promote your work?
Thank you so much for asking that. So it's an evolution for me. So between book one and book two, I've kind of learned a different things. So I promote through different channels, through things like Facebook ads. I did that for the first book, and I plan on doing that for the second book. Amazon ads, I also did that for the first book, and I'm actually going to be launching my ads for this second book soon. And there's a nifty website called BookBub, and essentially BookBub is a website that is almost exclusively geared towards readers. And I'm sure most of the people who might be watching this video are probably familiar with BookBub. So they basically have sales and deals that avid readers can find out about and get emails about. And what happens is with BookBub, as an independent author, you can pay for in-email ads. So essentially what happens is you bid just like you would bid for any other ad, to be in, let's say your genre is more along the lines of like a Tom Clancy. So with my first book, the hashtag, or I shouldn't say hashtag, but the thing I kind of equated my book to was like a crossover between the Avengers and Tom Clancy. So let's say with BookBub, you can go in there and say, okay, I want to target people who like Tom Clancy novels or people who like that genre. So you basically bid to be in emails sent to those people who are targeted for Tom Clancy novels or thriller novels. And your ad is in the body of the email at the very end. And so basically, with that, essentially, readers are able to click on your ad and then be taken to whether it be Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Google Play, Apple Store, to purchase your ebook. And that's essentially how that works. And then the other thing too is, of course, events like this, working with the local libraries. And again, I thank you so much for inviting me back to do a second interview. So that's another way I kind of let people be aware of my book. So.
Is the promoting a part of the process that you enjoy?
Yes and no. I'd say I would say the part that I think is tough on the promotion side is the cost. Like I mentioned before, the cost of getting ads can be, very expensive. I'm in a group called 20 Books to 50K, and it's basically a community of like thousands of independent authors around the world. And they have a Facebook group, and essentially what I've seen in that Facebook group is you spend a lot, like thousands of dollars in ads, as an independent author, which can be, as you can imagine, can be very expensive. If you have a 9 to 5 and you don't really have that
Yes.
much disposable income, you don't have that money. So yeah, so that part I don't like, but the part like this, talking to you, talking to other library systems, interacting with people in the community, that I enjoy very much.
Here's a question that I'm sure a lot of writers get. Where do you get the ideas for your books?
Thank you so much for asking that question. I get inspiration from my books from current events. So, as anyone who's read the first book can see, there's a lot of influence from things going on in the news, things going on in the culture. So, I get a lot of inspiration from that. Growing up, I was one of those weird, I shouldn't say weird kids, but one of those interesting kids who actually enjoyed watching, news shows like 60 Minutes and things like that. My stepdad actually made us watch that every Sunday evening, but I thought it was good because it made me aware of what was going on in the world. And I thought, with my storylines, I want to incorporate that. I want to have some real world relevancy to the storylines that I put out there. Even though it's fiction, primarily science fiction, so you have fantastical aspects to it, I still want to have some elements of a groundedness to it. That's, I think, very important. That way, a lot of readers can relate to what's going on. They can say, oh, you're referencing X, Y, and Z that happened in history. I'm familiar with that. And it kind of makes things a little bit more relevant. Um, the other influences are things, as I mentioned earlier, like spy thrillers, like Tom Clancy, Dragged in the Bear. That was actually a really good novel that I really enjoyed. Um, Michael Crichton, different authors, even shoot. The most recent novel I read was Killer Collective, and that was by I forget his name, but it'll come to me. So basically, that's a thriller novel. That's kind of similar to Visual because it has multiple characters in the same storyline. So things like that. Movies, of course. I'm big into action adventure movies, and then of course comics. I have a big love of comics, even starting from the age of around 6. My brother was the one who kind of influenced me when I got exposed to his stash of comics like Spider-Man and Thor and the Avengers and things like that. So.
Mhm. Tell us about your writing process. And do you find that you have a regular routine?
Yeah, great question. I would say my writing process is essentially straightforward. I initially like to work on an outline. So I'm sure people who are writers or readers who like to write, they're familiar with the term plotters and pantsers. So to give some background, plotters are basically people who like to sit down, come up with an outline, come up with a general structure for the novel before they sit down and actually write the novel. Pantsers are people who tend to, not all the time, but majority of the time, they tend to just start writing. They don't necessarily have an outline in mind. They don't have any. They have an idea of what they want the story to be, but they don't have any formalized structure. I am not of that group. I'm definitely a plotter, just because of the nature of the stories that I'm telling. I think it's important that I have a really well put together outline and plot. And even with the second book, that was a challenge right there. Even though because I would say I had to go through multiple iterations of the book. It went from it was an astronomical number, like 90,000 words initially, down to about just under 80,000 words, which is kind of comparable to my first novel. Um, it just takes time because you have to make sure that the plot and everything makes sense, the storyline makes sense, the various subplots and callbacks make sense. You don't want it just to be just some random thing that you throw in there at the very end of the storyline to kind of wrap things up. That's not believable to the reader. So you have to really think about it from a reader's perspective. I'm sorry, as well. So from there, from that outline, essentially what I do is I write my first draft, and I typically go through multiple drafts until I get it just right. I would say with Visual, I probably went through 10, 12, maybe, yeah, at least 10 drafts from when it first started, which was almost like a screenplay type format to what it finally ended up being. So I had to go through multiple drafts of that. With Sovereign, same thing. I think it was a little bit easier because I had a general storyline and had an outline, but I had to make some changes to the storyline because there were some aspects I had to take out um, that didn't necessarily move the story forward. It was sort of like a subplot that was interesting, but it was more interesting in its own book as opposed to it being incorporated in the current novel. So I ended up taking that part out, and so that was part of the whole editing process and drafting process. And of course, as I mentioned earlier in our conversation, I also will send a draft to an editor. I did both a and a lot of writers are familiar with this like a content editor, someone who actually edits for Substance, and then a copy editor.
Yes.
So yeah, so that those are the two people that I sent it to, and it's actually the content editor who gave me the wise advice of getting rid of some of the excess stuff that was in there, and then kind of narrowing it down to where it needed to be. So that's basically it. Once I get that manuscript down to where I like it, where I feel it's enjoyable, then I feel comfortable, doing a final copy edit and then going forward with publishing.
And where can someone buy your book?
Oh, great question. They can buy it on Amazon, Barnes and Noble. Those are the two main websites they can get Sovereign. As for Visual, which is the first book in the series, they can get it on Google Play, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Kobo, Writing Life, um, and I believe Books a Million, I believe, has it. So yeah, they can get it from multiple spots. I'm hoping to expand the locations for my second book. As many writers probably know, like different platforms have certain certain restrictions on what you can do in terms of ebooks and things like that. So I'm kind of in that space right now with the second book, making my book available on Kindle, um, on the Kindle app, but basically it's free for Kindle readers. But you have to do that for about like a 90-day window, then before you can put your ebook out there on other platforms. So I'm kind of in that space right now. So I plan on expanding it to Kobo and to Google Play eventually too.
Was your first book available as an ebook?
It was, yes. Both of them are available as ebooks. And as a matter of fact, the first book, I actually updated it a little bit, just more cosmetic changes. So essentially what I did was we changed the font of the title, as well as the font within the content of the book. And then we put a preview at the end of the first book of the second book. And there's just some additional information there. So more cosmetic changes, but yes, the first book uh, had some updates to it, but yeah, it's available. So
All right. And what is a piece of advice that you would give to aspiring writers?
okay, yes, I would say um, for aspiring writers, write what you love writing. Don't try and write something that you're not interested in, and also believe that you'll find your audience. But there is a little bit of a science to it. So even though I would advise writers to write what they like, they also have to keep in mind who they want to read their book. So, and that goes into audience targeting. There's a good author, his name is Chris Fox. He had a book called Right to Market, where he talks about different things in terms of writing and creating a book that will write towards the target market you're trying to get to. So even though you might like urban fantasy, vampire fantasy, you might like romance, you might like military sci-fi, you might like political thrillers, spy thrillers, you have to also target your preferred audience with things like the cover artwork, the blurb that you write to kind of capture those people, and then the ads that you do as well. So definitely want to target your ideal customer, even though you're still writing what you want to write, but you also have to think about your ideal customer as well. What would they be interested in writing to? So it's a little bit of a balancing act, but I would never say, oh, just write just like Stephen King, or just write just like uh, um, Michael Crichton, or just write just like Tomi Adeyemi. I would not say that. You have to write the stories that you like writing. You might get inspiration from other authors, which I think is a great thing. Every author gets inspiration from other authors. I think that's one of the best things about literature, best things about fiction, is that you can learn from other people. You get inspiration to incorporate those storylines into your story. But the thing is, the way you put it together is unique to you. So even though you might have elements from a Stephen King, Tom Clancy, a Tomi Adeyemi, whoever, you are making it your own, in the sense that this is kind of like you're inspired by these writers, but at the same time you're creating something that's unique to you. Even though you might borrow some elements of what they do, or some elements of what they write into your writing, the way you put it together is unique to you. So you always definitely have to keep that in mind as a writer.
Paa-Kofi, that brings me to the end of the questions that I have for you. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
Yeah, I would just like to say, for aspiring writers out there, I encourage you to continue writing, even if you don't think it's necessarily the best thing in the world. I think the main thing is just starting. I think a lot of times we get discouraged as people. We want things to be perfect. We want our writing to be perfect. We want the artwork on the cover to be perfect, but there's no such thing as perfection. So I think it's important to do the best quality work you can, but at the same time, not beat yourself up, or not limit yourself, and not publish your book. I think if you have a book in you, you should definitely write it and put it out there. There's so many people who have books within them that they don't ever put out in the world because they're afraid of criticism. They're afraid of, oh, I'm not good enough. They have this self-doubt. But sometimes you have to get over that, because there's people out there, even if it's one person who likes your book, that's one more person, who gets to read it, that wouldn't have been able to read it had you not put the book out there. So I would definitely encourage, people, writers, aspiring writers, to definitely go out there, write that book, put it out there. The first book is never the best book. I can attest to that myself. I'm still learning and growing. So definitely I put that out there. And then also for the readers out there, I want to let them know that Sovereign is available now on Amazon and Barnes & Noble. And you can also go on my website, www.pbobeng.com, where you can also find out more about the characters and the book. And you can also follow me on Instagram and Facebook. And they're all have the same hashtag, or my @ is author PB Obeng. So if you put in author PB Obeng, you'll be able to find me.
Thank you so much for joining me today, Paa-Kofi. I appreciate you taking the time to meet with me, and I wish you the best of luck with your new book.
Same to you. Thank you so much, Chris. Appreciate it.